We all tell ourselves a narrative that, I'm fit, I'm strong. That's the frail people that that's happening to. That fits our ego. The data doesn't support that, right? And you're going to find out the hard way. Healthspan isn't driven by your strengths. It's dictated by the weak link, which is your blind spot. Everyone's always asked me, what's the one thing I should do? And I can finally answer that now.
Professor Scott Fulton, I'm delighted to welcome you to Donut the Old Man Inn. Good to see you.
It's fun to be here, and I just love this kind of international flavor that we're going to get to play with tonight. So tonight, my Absolutely. Time, morning your time.
Morning my time, night your time. I appreciate you staying up. Before we jump into it, what will our guests get from our conversation today? Why should they stay listening to two men like you and I?
I think they're going to hear something that they've probably never heard before on functional health span, which is really the core of what all of us are thinking about, which no one has been speaking to really up until now. So I think it's going to be a challenge for some people in terms of some beliefs. That's a good thing to test ourselves, but clearly some new information that I really doubt they've heard before.
Well, on that, I really love your work. We came across each other on YouTube channels a few months ago. I've read both your books, and the thing I appreciate the most is you're sending a message that doesn't involve injections or peptides or supplements. You're sending a message that your body is the way. You got to take care of your body along the way. And what fascinated me about your work is you don't come from a medical background. You come from an engineering background, which means you're naturally a systems thinker in terms of breaking down the way things work or should work. Just as an entree into the conversation, tell us how you moved from engineering into aging as a way of thinking and a way of teaching.
It really goes way back to my childhood in terms of my curiosity with aging. And it was really looking at, again, through the circles that my parents brought me into. I got to meet a lot of people who were quite successful in their careers. And I saw quite varied outcomes in their aging experiences, which said to me, there's more than money involved in successful aging. So I paid attention to it when I went into corporate work. I looked at the leaders and different people and to see which ones were succeeding in life, not just in a career, in my perception of it, at least. I describe myself as a research engineer. So as opposed to a research scientist, I'm very much about the practical aspects, but relying on data, like really good data, but what can we use out in the real world? And so, it was 2016, and I said, okay, I've got another career. I mean, I'm not that keen on retirement anyway. It's never been part of my plan. I've had this interest in aging. Clearly, the boomers have arrived and are arriving. I think it's time because I'm seeing a lot of unmet needs out there. And to my surprise, I didn't realize it, is how close medicine and engineering are. They share a lot of technology. They share a lot of thinking around how to solve problems.
Fantastic. You're also a triathlete and someone who's used to doing long runs, long swims, long bike rides. And one of the points you make in your book, Function, that really jumps out at me is fitness is not a predicator or a good predictor of health span. And given you've spent so long being very, very fit, I thought this is a really interesting point of view. And given our audience are typically men between 40 and 60, a lot of them are very, very fit. So talk us through that contradiction of why we think fitness doesn't actually lead to a healthy long-term life.
Right. It's a fair assumption, and I would be as guilty of it as anybody. And it wasn't really until I did my research for Function that it really underlined the difference between the two. So what was clear was the things that we need in later life, we need to be setting ourselves up for. And what we find out is things like running does not translate to walking in later life. And that's kind of counterintuitive. It certainly was for me. And I started to look into what are the biomechanics involved in running versus walking, and they're different. And I've had my own experiences of a running injury. And so I had to walk, and I was training to walk fast because I'm trying to get a lot out of my exercise. And I had sore muscles like, what's going on here? Yesterday I was running, a 5-minute kilometer. Today I'm I'm getting sore muscles from just walking fast.
Why does that happen? Can you explain it to someone who doesn't understand? Why?
Right. So it is the foundational difference between running and walking is that the way we define it is literally your one foot is always on the ground. As soon as you come off the ground, you're now into a launch mode. And so it engages many more muscles. And then it's also the landing that happens versus walking is a relatively smooth transition. As soon as we start to run, the G forces go up instantly, right? So yes, there's a cardiovascular component to it, but more in terms of the strength and the biomechanics of it. And so because it's a different motion, it doesn't translate to walking the way we would assume it does. And so if you look at older adults, just because they ran, they don't have any better walking or lower risk of walking related issues in later life.
And the cardiovascular benefit of running, does that translate to any cardiovascular benefit when you're walking in at 50, 60, 70, 80?
Right. So in walking, again, it depends who we're talking about. If we're talking about someone who's fit, so we would measure that by their VO2 max. Right. And so running and cycling are two of the most common activities that are good for promoting VO2 max, cardiovascular, essentially efficiency and capacity. If we think about that same individual walking, they have excess cardiovascular reserve. So that's not going to be the limiter. The limiter is going to be strength because it's a different move. A runner is not necessarily particularly strong in the walking muscles. That's why I said I was surprised I had soreness. Well, it's because I'm engaging different muscles and using them differently. There's also a difference around mobility in terms of the two. And then the balance would be the other one where if you're running, you tend to run a pretty straight line. I'm talking about someone who's running on the road running, for example. Yeah. Go trail running, and now you're suddenly the footings change. Yeah. You have a whole lot of things going on where it's remarkably different. Not just that you run slower, it engages far more domains we talk about in terms of cognitively, you're far more engaged. Otherwise, you're going to end up tripping over a rock. Right? You can get away with drifting when you're running. And, I've had some great thoughts when I'm running, brilliant things, and I can really focus on them. It's kind of like moving meditation. We don't do that when we're trail running, for example.
We don't do that meditative type thinking because the ground is unstable and therefore we might just fall over because we're not concentrating. Is that what your point?
Right. So if we think about, so now what we're talking about is really gets into what we call dual task training. So we've got some physical activity that's a baseline that's getting our heart rate up, but then we're also engaging our mind. And so we can do that two ways. I can run on a path and turn over and I can think about all sorts of things I want to do on my next book or whatever idea. So I'm engaging my brain that way. But once I go to a path, I don't have the bandwidth anymore because the brain can only do so much. It's got to manage the feed, still got to keep track of the pathway and things. But now as soon as you go over the cognitive load goes up significantly. And so you don't have the bandwidth anymore in terms of reserve or extra reserve to do that as well.
I did not know that, but now that I think about it, I've been on quite a lot of hikes, and the experienced hikers go quiet early to concentrate, and the really experienced ones say, over the next kilometer, I'm just going to concentrate on what I'm walking on, which I'd never realized that was actually either learnt or a proactive way of thinking about the way you walk.
Yeah, it just happens, right? Because it's people get quiet because their brain is consumed doing something else. Right? They could be off in some other world, sitting next to you, but there's only so much. Or they'll get a break, right? The path gets a little easier, and then they'll talk, and then it gets a little more challenging, and they get quiet. So there's so much that I learned from this research that you realize is quite intuitive, but it just no one's ever looked at it this way before.
Can I grab your attention for a second? I hope you're enjoying the conversation. We're a new podcast and we're growing pretty fast, so thank you everybody for listening and watching. Can I ask you to subscribe or press like on whatever platform you're listening or watching this to, because that helps us to keep growing, and then it helps us to give us shows like this. Back to the episode. You cite a really interesting statistic in your book that, and correct me if I get this not quite right, but if we're able to increase our speed, I think you said by 0.1 kilometers per hour, it adds an ability to be healthier over time, in terms of like a lot healthier over time. Now that seems like a a tiny increase for an extraordinary amount of benefit. Can you explain that to us?
Right. So I'll correct you on that. So it was in reference to walking speed or gait speed, we call it. Right. It's 0.1 meters per second.
Okay.
Which is still not very much. So consistent with what you said, it's not a lot. The research that I did was to look at what are the big longitudinal studies that we've done. So I didn't generate any of the data. Right? I went to the vast pools of data, 700,000 participants, over 10 million person years of data to pull all this out. And walking is one of the most robust and rich fields of data there is, because we do it right from the child's first step until essentially the activities of daily living come under threat towards the later years. And so having in a longitudinal study, you get to track the same people over a decade or more. And what you find out is that we see what speed looks like at early age, or in your 20s, in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. And they follow a pattern. If you're on the median or 50th percentile, unless you do anything different, you're going to stay on that trajectory, right? You've conditioned, you've trained yourself a certain pattern of I walk at this speed. And when the studies looked at how does that compare in later years, what they find is that the faster you walk, the later you come at risk in terms of health span risk or losing independence. So walking speed is one of the clear indications of when you're at risk of losing your independence. And so we can track that quite easily. And what we find out is 0.1 meters per second equates to about a 10-year difference in health span. And
That's
for most people, it is. And the difference, and so since the book's been out, right, it's been really fun to watch the feedback come back on it. It's like some people, oh, that's crazy. Well, because they've never practiced walking fast. They walk a lot. Yeah. They count their steps, and they're big on that. And steps are great to kind of keep track of you're active. You're not sitting all day. But it doesn't correlate to health span and longevity anywhere near the way that speed does, because there isn't the depth of data. So what we see is people will say, well, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to start walking faster because it matters. I didn't realize it mattered before. And so once you realize it matters, I don't have to tell anybody. I don't tell anybody to go walk faster. I don't need to. The data is so obvious to them because there's so much of it. It's like, well, why wouldn't you? Because you can. And walking 0.1 meters a second faster is generally just a matter of intention. It's really not harder. It's just saying, oh, okay, I guess I should put a little bit more intention into it. And they adapt, and that's it.
So can we break that down just a level more? The walking faster, therefore that increases both strength and there has to be some cardiovascular benefit as well. But does it also increase your cognitive ability to perceive potential falls or instability? Is that part of the reason why there's a benefit to you?
Right. So maybe there's a good segue into talk about falls for a minute, because what I hear most people on the internet talking about falls is strength. Right? You need to do more strength training. Yes, strength is part of it, but going right back to your point was a perfect setup. It's the reaction time. Mm-hmm. All the strength in the world. If you look at the great big muscular guys, would you say any of them has fast reflexes? Typically not. Mm-hmm. Right? So we don't have to go massive to see that. It's really the reaction time is the first thing. And so exactly to your point, it's a great question. Thank you. What you're consciously training is your cognitive reaction time, or your neuromotor speed, in terms of that receive the signal, whether it's coming in through your eyes, perhaps processing it. Okay, there's a danger coming up in 1.5 steps. You don't think about it consciously, but you automatically make an adjustment on the fly. And so the faster you're walking, you're training your cognitive or neuromotor speed to keep up at a faster rate than if you were walking slower. Wow.
I know you're going to talk to us about your self-assessments, because that's a key part of your book. And when you and I spoke a few weeks ago, you suggested to me I start washing my teeth on one leg as a way to start retraining my ability to perceive falls. And I tell you what, it's actually difficult. I've been surprised that, I don't know. And then one leg is better than the other leg, which is also surprisingly interesting to find that out. So, that notion of how do we perceive a potential danger, i.e. falling, is clearly an important part of aging. You reminded me of, I'm involved in some community groups here in Sydney, and we have a group of women who are in their 70s in that community group who walk every morning at 6 a.m. They have done so for 40 plus years. And I've passed them by a few times, and they're always walking really fast, and they're always laughing and walking fast. But I asked the leader of the group, why do they walk so fast? And her automatic answer to me was, we're training ourselves not to fall. Now, perfect. I don't know whether that's a learned process. I don't know whether she's an ex-nurse, so she may well have some insight from a medical perspective. But I thought that was a really fascinating automatic response, which now ties up to what your research is telling us.
And I think what comes out of it, that's a great example, is that, and it goes back to what I said, like, well, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to start walking faster. It's driven by awareness, because most of us, once we become aware of something that's really obvious and irrefutable, we don't need to spend a whole lot of time. We may not like it in the moment. Like, certainly that's some people's reaction is, wow, I thought I was, 75th percentile. Just this morning, I got a note from somebody, I'm not even median. Yeah. So it's okay. Now versus finding out in a decade or two when it's really going to matter and it's too late to do anything about it. And my advice to all those people is to say, use time as your friend. You don't have to fix this today. You now have an awareness and you have a target to work for. And over the next year, right? If you're just being intentional about it, you're going to make significant progress. It's inevitable.
Yeah. Your central argument, I think, in your book Function is that it's not so much our strength that will bring us forward. It's the lack of awareness of our blind spots that will be a problem. And therefore, tending to our blind spots could be a really positive way of taking care of our long-term health. What are some of the specific blind spots? And of course, the speed we walk is obviously one of those that you've alluded to. But what are some of the other specific blind spots that we humans are not as alert to as we could be?
In no particular order, other than I try to keep the same order, just to have some sense of order. Strength and power is kind of one of them. Cardiovascular recovery is another. Mobility and balance is the third. Flexibility and structure. And then neuromotor and cognition are the fifth. And so in reality, no one is going to be 90th percentile in all of them. They might think they are. Certainly a lot of people think they are, but they haven't actually tested it, right? So that was really the notion to find out, is once you realize health span isn't driven by your strengths, it's dictated by the weak link, which is your blind spot. So what's typically going to be the thing you don't do? You've been avoiding it. You're so practiced at avoiding it, you're not even aware that you're avoiding it. So I'll use that example you raised up, brushing your teeth. So standing on one leg is one thing. Standing on one leg and doing any activity at all is another level of challenge. And so that's kind of what we think about that we need to be ready for in later years, because essentially we will always have different things coming at us over the course of life. The one thing for certain is that our brain, in terms of cognitive speed, the turnaround, the processing speed, is not likely to get faster. It's far more likely to get slower, which means we need more time. We need a little extra time a few more milliseconds makes a big difference when we're coming down to a decision that involves whether we're going to see a fall risk, whether we're going to react in time, whether we're going to recover, or maybe we fall, but we break the fall in a way that we haven't hurt ourselves. So there are many steps around that timing that really matters. But ideally, we want to be back from that fall. And falls are a good one just because they are the number one risk that all of us need to be aware of. And they don't just happen to the frail. It's nice to think that way. And I think that's, to get maybe to that point for a moment, we all tell ourselves a narrative that, I'm fit, I'm strong. That's the frail people that that's happening to. That fits our ego. Reality is, yes, they're at higher risk, but to think that we're not, no, sorry, it just, again, the data doesn't support that, right? And you're going to find out the hard way unless you're willing to actually actually put yourself to the test.
Just to back up your point there, Scott, Kerry Sackville has been a guest on this show, and she is a Sunday columnist in one of the largest national newspapers in Australia. And I just noticed she had an article on the paper on Sunday last where she fell off a stepladder. And she was talking about, I thought this only happened to men in their 60s or 70s, but here I am, I've just turned 50 and I can't stand on a stepladder. And of course, it's not that she can't stand, it's just that she fell.
Yeah, the house that we grew up in, my father built, and this was before the days of power tools, all with hand saws and hand drills and things. And it had a fairly steep roof. And as a kid, I would get up on the roof and go up and adjust the antenna because the wind would blow and we couldn't get I lived near Niagara Falls, Ontario. And so we were trying to get the Buffalo station typically. And I thought nothing of it. I did other jobs where I was up high. And so this last fall, I built a big timber frame carport, not particularly high off the ground, but I found myself having to do a lot of ladder work. And I was up on the top and realizing I'm a whole lot more nervous than I realized. I hadn't even factored that in. But what I did find was that because it was a long project, took several months, is that my balance and confidence went up every day. And eventually it came back and got quite strong. Again, because I hadn't been practicing it.
Yeah.
That said, months go by, I got up on a ladder recently and went to reach for something. I thought, wow, this doesn't feel as secure. So if we don't use it, we lose it, right? And so the idea with all of these domains is essentially they're all driven by demand. If we don't demand it, it will decline, and it will decline faster in the second half of life than it ever did in the first.
So you've talked about walking gait and speed. You talked about ladders and perceiving falls or not being as confident on heights. What are some of the other blind spots that are coming up through your research?
So flexibility is one, right? The ability to just be able to bend over and tie up your shoes. A basic thing we wouldn't think about, and I write about this story in the book about one of the golfers at our club. He couldn't bend over to put the ball on the tee anymore. He could still drive at 250 yards and hit the fairway frequently, but his flexibility caught up with him, and then he still had to bend over to get the ball out of the hole. It ended what was his number one passion. Right? So it could be, and then the other can be a cognitive decline because we're just not training ourselves, or we're not testing our brains the way that we used to. And so that can happen for particularly men coming out of career, right? We had all that cognitive stimulation. We're managing a whole bunch of things, making a lot of decisions. And then we walk away and suddenly there's this void. And what are we going to fill it with? And it isn't just information coming in, right? That isn't essentially helping train or drive neurogenesis, the creation of new neurons and new pathways. It's just information. It's the exercising of the information, things like learning music, learning language, navigating, a number of things that cause us to have to work the brain just like we work the muscles and cardiovascular system. So it's I have an example of a neighbor of mine. He was the manager of 3 automotive plants of one of the big U.S. automotive companies. Within a year and a half of retirement, he had dementia. Right? And so he hadn't done anything to evaluate it, and most wouldn't know where to start. Clearly, he had some predisposition to it. But by the time we find out, if we wait until we get a diagnosis, the things we can do are less because a lot of the options have just gone off the table.
You cite in the book the notion that our genetics count for around 15% of future ailments, such as potentially dementia or other things. The rest is lifestyle. And for a lot of us, I think in this decade, and we look back to our parents who are maybe less physically active or maybe less adventurous than we might be today, we often write off their health issues as in, they just didn't take care of themselves. Yet genetics play, 15% approximately role in our lives. What do you say to men who are listening who are kind of writing off their fathers and not really thinking about their own health?
So maybe the other piece to factor into this is what's the environmental exposure that they had over their lifetime versus the exposure we're having over our lifetime. So if I look at my parents, my grandparents, if they were farmers, for example, like in my family so we had some chemicals, for example, that farmers were exposed to, which were clearly problematic from chronic health standpoint. We've only really started studying this over the last decade and a half, and we've seen a significant change happen already. So the fact that we're more active and thinking we're doing better, the question is, but are we doing enough to counteract the things, the risks that we're dealing with that they didn't have to deal with? They naturally had more exercise when they were younger, which we didn't appreciate. They tended to walk more. They tended to do more things manually. Things were not as automated, and we're conveniently forgetting that.
Can I just pause this conversation for a second? A lot of our listeners tell me they really love the episode and they get a lot of value from it. They're just not quite sure what to do with it. So what I have done is record a 10-minute episode. It goes out a couple of days later with a couple of key actions that will absolutely work and the research behind them to tell you why they'll work. All you got to do is execute. Can't be simpler than that. So have a listen to the episode. It comes out a couple of days later and let us know which ones you're doing and how they're working for you. Back to the conversation. So that leads to the main thrust of your book, Function, which are self-assessments. And you outline over 40 different self-assessments that we can do to continually monitor our ability or our potential decline and hopefully try to arrest that. Can you maybe outline the top 3 or 4 you think our listeners should be really paying attention to?
One of the most important, which we've touched on already, is walking, because it's something that hopefully we all do. Not everyone can, obviously, but by and large, it's the one thing that's in common that we do across our whole lifespan. And it's also one of the easiest to adjust, because once we know, all it requires is a bit of intention. So there's 4 different types of walking tests in there. So one would be, if we said the geriatric is a 4-meter walking test, that's really designed for later in life. There's a 6-minute test, which is you go walk and you measure your 550 meters or whatever that might be. So then you look on the table to say, okay, I'm a male. I did this distance. That puts me at a certain percentile and at what age I'm at. So it's all age based or age graded. So I can find out what percentile I am. The other would be what we call the Rockport mile, so 1.6 kilometers nominally. And then there's another one that's also a run walk. So you can kind of play around with any one of those or any multiples of those to find out where you are. The other one is, again, the simple one you referred to as a single leg balance. It's just a good way to check if you can balance on one leg for 45 seconds without touching the other leg, without hopping around. You're good. You can do it on both legs. And then you think you're good, try it with your eyes closed. So the idea is there's some progressions in here. Yeah. Not everything is.
And by the way,
easy.
Scott, I should say to you, when you do it with your eyes closed, make sure you know where the shower door is. So when you fall backwards like I did, don't bang the shower door, right?
Well, the bathroom is already the number one risk place for injuries at home, right? So maybe this isn't the place to be trying any of the balance test, let alone the eyes closed. Yeah, no, it's you can do it with something, something stable to grab onto right handy. So what you're doing there is you're training your proprioceptive system to be able to essentially train with the brain to be more responsive. So all you're doing, it's like we talk about, somebody loses the ability to hear and so their vision gets better, or vice versa, they lose their eyesight, their hearing gets better. It's the same thing. The brain adapts. And so you're forcing what we would call a hormetic stress to put a certain exercise or stress on the brain in a short period of time to increase those pathways. There's a number of cognitive self-assessments I put in. I think, again, one of the easy ones, which I remember seeing as a kid, was the ruler drop. Someone holds a ruler and you just cut, above your fingers, and then they let go. They don't tell you they're going to let go, and you can't do it yourself because your brain, one side of your brain tells the other side, I'm about to let go. You ready? I'm going to let go. So we get past that and you have to react. And so the farther the ruler drops, the slower your reaction time. And so again, we can measure that on a percentile base. There's things like another great one is the chair stand. just standing from a seated position in a chair. How many times can you do that in 30 seconds without using your hands? And so, great example, a CEO came back to me. He said, Scott, I can't believe how much that's impacted me, because he said, I didn't realize I was always using my hands to get up. So every time you use your hands to get up, you're denying the ability to train your mobility. You're denying an opportunity for lower leg strength. And that's something you will want to do for the rest of your life. And so when are you going to start practicing it? Well, why not start now?
I'm the exact same position as that particular gentleman you referred to, that I hadn't come across that. And I am now so aware of, am I, and if I am, how often am I using my hands to get out of the chair? Now, sometimes a really low down couch, I must say, I find difficult to get out of without using my hands, but I'm now hyper conscious of even just turning the chair around so I can actually just get out without having to use hands. And it's one of those things that I wasn't even aware I wasn't doing until I read it in your book.
And it fits in with what I really wanted to make the book accessible in terms of easy things to do, right? And the other was, they're things we're already doing. So nothing in the book says you need to go to the gym 3 times a week and you need to start doing new things. It's really built around, what are the things that you're already doing and what intention can you bring to them if you need to raise your game. Now there's things like push-ups and some of those things which maybe you're doing or not. You don't need to do push-ups as part of everyday life, but largely going upstairs. Like, how long does it take you to go up 10 steps? So again, that's all measured in there. And you can look with, if you're a male, say at this age, it should take me this many seconds. Oh, when it's no running, no pulling yourself up with a handrail, just basic stuff to know. And again, what are you going to do if you're slow? You're probably going to start to use a little bit more intention.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just essentially it's built around things that we're already doing, which I think is another reason the book went #1 bestseller last week. And I think that's partly why, as people have said, this is so obvious and so valuable. Why didn't anybody think of this before?
Well, it's as I said up front, you're setting a message which is lovely, which is your body's the way. You don't need external influences like injections or peptides or supplements, etc. You can actually do a whole lot by yourself, which we either, as you said, our environment has changed to the extent that we don't do it naturally, but actually our body was designed to do this. Can you talk about the assessment of getting off the floor in minimal movements? Because that is an assessment, I have to tell you, I find almost impossible to do perfectly, and certainly almost impossible to do it well. So can you talk through that one, why that's important?
Right. So again, fast forward, and this is really hard for all of us to do. I have a lot more practice of it because I spent so much time studying it and I've been around a lot of older adults and analyzing it. So I can see myself there more easily than others. It is genuinely hard. That the brain was not designed to worry about what's going to happen 25 years down the road. So it just because you want to doesn't make it easy. But the classic thing is I want to get down and be able to play on the floor with my kids. And so that requires an ability to get up safely. And so the basics of practicing it, and I will tell you a big source of what we would call 911 calls. What is it in Australia?
000.
000. Yeah. Is somebody's fallen and they can't get up in terms of because their spouse can't even help them get up off the floor, right? So these are basic skills that are better practice. And so getting up off the floor is one of those things that because we don't practice it, it goes away. We assume we can do it, but we never actually practice it unless we do it intentionally. Maybe we have grandchildren or something and we're doing it, or we're doing some sport that requires to do it. But it's partly the mobility piece. It's not simply a strength piece. It's a mobility piece. Can I rock my body and in momentum know that, like getting on a bicycle to go, right? Mm-hmm. If you tried to stop and do a bicycle in a stationary position, it's much harder. Once you know the rhythm and the sequence and you get your foot on, you start to lean forward and the bike starts to roll forward and you get a little centrifugal assistance from the wheels, it all gets very easy. So it's the same, but it requires some practice.
So I tried to do it, couldn't do it. And I asked my 20-year-old son, so, how many moves does it take to get up and down off the floor? One move in each direction, which means, at least as a 20-year-old, it was so easy. But certainly as a 56-year-old, I found that very, very hard. But you'll be delighted to know I've started practicing burpees badly, but I've started practicing them. And now that movement to the floor and back up is just getting easier every day. So I completely agree with you about it's a practice piece. If you do it in time, if you do it too late, then it's too late.
Everything is generally up for improvement, but the later you leave it, right, the less the ceiling is. And that's what we're trying to do, is to move the ceiling up, and essentially without leaving any gaps along the way. And that's really why the 5 domains are there, is that, and I really try to stress this with people, all 5 are equally important. You might love VO2 related things and feel really strong and really good, and all the hormone response you get from it, and maybe you win races or something. That's all good. Nothing wrong with doing that. But don't do it at the expense of the other things, or think that that's going to somehow help you get off the floor more easily, help prevent you from falling.
In your earlier book, you wrote about how someone who's a 60-year-old, if they reach the 90th percentile, they could potentially add 11 more years onto their overall health span, longevity span. That seemed like a again, going back to the 0.1 meters per second, a small amount of effort for a massive benefit. And I haven't come across that statistic before. Where did that research come from, and how do we know that?
Right. So it was the research which I did for WellSpan, which was totally unrelated to the research I did for function. But again, it comes back to the same essentially the same principles that we know, that the more you're able to manage the activities of daily living, which are essentially all the elements we've been talking about, like getting up out of chairs, walking speed, things like you can run. We know that equates to a prediction of health span and longevity better than disease. So maybe there's a point to put in here, is we tend to think about a lot about health span and longevity in the context of disease, right? Because if I get heart disease, what's that going to do for me? If I get diabetes, what's that going to do for me? The reality is, many of those diseases we know how to manage quite well. Doesn't mean we're not, that we're not at risk at having a heart attack and myocardial infarction. But the reality is, when we think about health span in terms of our ability to do the things that we want to do for as long as possible, health, in terms of functional health span, the ability to do things, outstrips disease by 2 to 1. So in terms of the rate limiter for health span, the ability to essentially lose independence is what some would define it. It's more likely to be, like the odds of 2 to 1, it's going to be a functional limitation versus a disease. It's not to say there isn't a comorbidity. Doesn't mean you're not going to have heart disease, but you can still manage quite well with heart disease. I have heart disease, and I have a VO2 of 99 percentile. I manage it quite well. I pay attention to it, and that isn't likely to change. But the reality is, functional awareness and functional ability has a far more influence on our healthy and what our journey will look like than disease.
That makes so much sense to me. We had a leading cancer researcher on this show a few months ago who talked about our ability to treat cancers is just the best it's ever been. And with the advent of using AI in cancer research, the ability to predict future treatments is just getting better and better. So treating and managing of cancer is just, it's so much better than at any stage of our humanity. But as you said earlier on, the number one reason people call 911 is because they can't get off the floor. And the number one admission to hospitals for someone over 70 is falls. So that's that preventative type stuff that's within our power is, as you said, so much more important than necessarily worrying about, can I treat cancer if ever I get it? Yeah,
and disease risk models are designed to predict disease risk, not health span, right? And I think that's maybe another really important point to make, is that the medical system is not built around your and my health span. It's built around your and my disease. That's what medicine is for. Thank goodness it is. And it's doing a spectacular job. And in 10 years, it'll be even more spectacular. But when it comes to function and our ability, that's pretty much on you and I. And no one's been doing anything about it. We just assumed everyone would know what to do. And
that's right. And
a couple of generations ago, we did, but we didn't have the disease management that we do now. So we kind of we raised that one, but we kind of lost the other one.
Exactly right. Exactly right. You talk about foundations, including mind, environment, diet, activity, and community, and that grabbed my attention. One of the premises of this whole podcast is to help men to remind us as we get older that community plays a very important part in the second half of our life. And yet men have a tendency to pull away from community or to lean into the community as designed by their partner or spouse. What's your view around men and community and the importance of community, and how do you think about that in terms of recommend that?
Yeah, this is oddly enough, I'm teaching a class right now called The Beautiful Brain, and had a retired cardiologist in the class. And he asked around this particular question, which was interesting coming from a man, because I tend to get about 2/3 women and 1/3 men in terms of showing up for in-person classes. So it's clearly, and you would know this, it's a different challenge for men than it is for women. Traditionally, not that it's exclusive to one or the other, but traditionally it's a bigger issue for men. And again, I've been in corporate and I've been around leaders who've been quite successful. And so we see things like identity, right, is so focused on their career. And the great thing about anyone going into the office is there's an instant social network. The bad thing about going into an office is it vanishes the day you walk out and take the things home from your office with you. So that's gone. So if you haven't been investing in the social circles outside of the office, starting over is a really hard thing to do. It's incredibly humbling to do, to discover that not everybody wants to please you. When you're the boss, everybody just, I'm here to please you. Man or woman doesn't matter. That goes away. It vanishes. And now suddenly you're just this average person who's having to make a case for your value, which your title, right? You said, you're the president, you're the manager, whatever. That set the value. So that's gone now. So you've got to make it yourself with every person you meet. And it's like, wow, this is work. I don't know that I really want to do it, because they don't even understand it, right? Whereas at work, most people understand most of what, the people around you, what you do, at least to some degree. One of my brothers had decided early on with his wife, they like to travel. So they really intentional about their friends, which is hard when you travel because you go away for months at a time and you tend to lose friendships, but got really intentional and so invested in friends. So, but they started in their 40s and they were able to continue it into retirement. So, it's really hard, and to think it's not going to take work, but I'll tell you, it's worth it. I got invited into a men's group here, and I am the young kid on the block. But that said, there's men in their 80s that are in the group, and I absolutely love it. It's a men's group. We get together once a month, and we talk about all sorts of things. I enjoy learning from them. I think they enjoy learning some things from me. But either way, it's just, and I tell people who say it's too hard, well, find where the groups are already. So I got invited into an existing group. It is so much easier than trying to do the work yourself. You don't have to be the pioneer, right?
Exactly right.
Whatever that social group is, like the walking group of women you talked about, right? So the same sort of thing. Just go find the group and join it. It may not be your thing, but you'll find the social element will be maybe the thing that keeps you coming back, and maybe it'll take you on to the next thing.
I'm 100% in alignment with you in all of this, and we have regularly on this show we have showcased groups like the Men's Table or Mongrels Men or Men's Circles for the reason you've just said, is to showcase that it's not difficult to join a group when they're up and running. and just showing up is the hardest battle. The rest actually just takes care of itself. And what I also find is a lot of these groups, Mongols Men being an example, they base their community around exercise. So you get to do a walk on the beach together for an hour as part of the process. So you're tackling both the physical functional movement of a unsteady beach as well as being in company of fellow travelers. So yes, completely agree with you on that whole piece. Scott, this has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm not surprised your book has gone to number one because it's really, really helpful. What question have I not asked you that you think would be useful to explore?
Maybe what's missing for most people is this appreciation for capacity. Mm-hmm. We tend to all underestimate our capacity to do things. So you mentioned Ironman, that I had done some Ironmans. I had no clue what I was doing when I signed up to do it. I had no idea of what my time might be. But of things I took away from that experience was because I had no athletic background, none. I didn't do any college sports. I was coaching. I was running a big soccer club, but I was the administrator. I was the referee. I was never a soccer player. I wasn't a runner. And I was shocked to discover what I was able to do over a period of about 5 years from when I started.
How old were you when you started?
So I did my first Ironman when I was, I think, 47. And I probably started riding a bike again when I was about 43. I used to love riding my bike around the neighborhood as a kid. And that reconnected me with my youth. I just loved that freedom my bike gave me. But the reason I say that is not about me. It's caused me to look at others and realize the things that people are able to do. It astounds them, and they want to come back and revalidate. They want to inspire others, and so it's also a way to inspire others around you by essentially pushing that envelope. I remember when I was doing the training and my 16-year-old son said, "Oh, the old man's going out for a run. This should be fun." And boy, that was just the motivation I needed. Right? But we do see this in all areas, really at all ages. So it's no one needs to do an Ironman. That's not what it's about. It's really around understanding we all tend to have a lot more capacity. We tend to shy away from the risk of failure and embarrassment.
Well, I'm really, really glad to hear you say that. And I'll tell you why. And that is, and I don't think I've said this in this podcast before now. I will be talking more about it over time. I've enrolled and entered into doing High Rocks later this year. So I'm 14 weeks away from the event. And for those folks who don't know, High Rocks is a mixture of 8 by 1 kilometer runs and 8 by functional based exercise races like kettlebells and rowing and burpees and stuff. And I'm doing doubles with my son. So my 20-year-old son and I are doing it together. A, it's very, very hard. But B, I'm surprised continually at the capacity that I'm leaning into, not realizing, I didn't know I could do that.
And it changes over the course of a lifetime too. Right. And just because we didn't like something when we were younger doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to like it now. That flips around too. So I think that's just a really important message.
Well, I'm glad I asked you that question. I'm walking away feeling more confident this morning, Scott, because of that. Tell me, what would the 80-year-old version of you be asking you now or trying to tell you now if they could talk to you?
I think it would be around tension. I think healthy tension is really important. We get too complacent. We don't have enough tension in our lives. We'll get pulled one way or the other. So I think it's that balance of, are you enjoying what life has to offer you today? Are you really living it to all the things you can be doing that you want to do, while at the same time setting yourself up for success? Because this 80-year-old body is counting on you today, or counting on me today, right? And so that's, and I think that's always the way I manage people, right? I always here's the framework. How you do it inside that framework, I really don't care. There's a lot of ways to do it that I know work. And if you need to talk to me around, you want to go outside the framework, we'll have a conversation. But ultimately, We just need a framework that's going to allow us to have some fun and to get where we're trying to go and express our own individual interests and passions.
Fantastic. Professor Scott Fulton, thank you for joining us today. I really enjoyed your book, Function, and not surprised it's number one. My last question for you is, what are your final words of wisdom for our listeners?
It really comes back to, everyone's always asked me, what's the one thing I should do? And I can finally answer that now. Find your blind spot. It's the best thing you'll do for yourself. What you do with it then will be entirely up to you, but at least you'll know what it is, and you'll decide on how to act, what way is best for you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Pod. Really great conversation.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe or like on any platform that you're watching and listening to. It means a lot to us. If you have any comments, please drop them into the comment section. Of course, share this episode with your friends. We know they love that. And in the meantime, don't let the old man in.